planned this evening, but if the alarm does sound, Mr. O'Connell will assist the situation and provide further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. I would remind you that this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on Maidstone Borough Council's website, but will anybody else be recording or filming the proceedings? I even knew where to look. Thank you, Councillor Mackay. I ask this so that people in the meeting will know if this is happening. Members who are using mobile phones or tablets are asked please to ensure that these are on silent and are only being used with regard to the business on the agenda this evening. So moving swiftly to apologies for absence, item 1. We've had apologies for absence from Faye Gooch, who is possibly landing at Heathrow or Gatwick after being away on holiday, but is unable to make it this evening. Item 2, notification of any substitute members. I don't have any. Urgent items, there are none. Notification of any visiting members. I'll ask her to stand at the microphone. Would you come to the microphone, please, for the record? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Sams, and I'll be asking a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any disclosures by members and officers?
Thank you, Leader. Disclosure on behalf of myself and the directors concerning item 18 in the agenda as it refers to the appraisal process that we will be going through.
Okay, thank you very much for that information. Any disclosures of lobbying around the table? Okay, none noted, thank you. Item 7, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. As there are no exempt information items, we will not need to do that this evening. Okay, on to item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of January 2020. I won't go through page by page. Is anybody wishing to make any amendments to the minutes that you've had? Okay, thank you very much then. Are we agreed that the minutes be approved? Thank you very much. I will sign those before the end of the meeting. Presentation of petitions, there are none. So item 10, questions from members to the chairman. There is a question from Councillor Sams. Would you like to step forward, please? I've got this slightly the wrong way round, so agenda one way round. Okay, so I would then like to switch those round so that questions and answer section for members of the public. There are 3 questions this evening. I'd like to remind the committee that the questions and answer session from the members of the public is restricted to a total of 30 minutes. Group leaders have the right to respond after I've responded, but in order that each member of the public has their initial and supplementary questions answered within the time frame, please be mindful when considering whether or not to respond to these questions. Okay, the first question then is from Kate Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Deputy Communication Manager has now confirmed that this Council has no intention to use compulsory purchase orders in respect of the principal landowners that it is already in preliminary commercial discussions with in relation to the council-led garden community in Lanham. At least a quarter of these principal landowners have told this Council already that they have no intentions whatsoever in selling their land to you. On that basis, the Save Our Heathlands Action Group would like to know why you are still pursuing this proposal.
Thank you very much for the question. This Council is in preliminary commercial discussions with the principal landowners and their advisors. This has resulted in the drafting of heads of terms for a commercial proposition for their initial consideration and feedback. This feedback is expected in the coming weeks, and so no decision will be made at this moment in time. None of the principal landowners have informed the council that they will no longer wish to be taking part in the ongoing discussions. The council has been asked for its position concerning compulsory purchase orders on several occasions over the last few weeks. The proposal at Heathlands is at a formative stage, and the council is in commercial negotiations with the principal landowners. The intention is to agree terms on a negotiated basis. So CPO is not an intended route in the respect of land acquisition in respect to the principal landowners. At this point, would any other leaders around the table wish to respond? Okay, thank you. So do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. The threat of compulsory purchase orders continues to provoke fear and trepidation in the Lenham Heath community. Can you please confirm formally here tonight that this council will not pursue at any time CPO powers for principal or any other side landowners in Lenham Heath to develop your garden community proposals? A simple yes or no answer, please.
I think I've given my statement as to whether or not we intend to have CPO carried out on this project at this stage, and therefore I have nothing else to add.
Thank you.
We have a question to the Chairman from Sally King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Residents, councillors and our MP Helen Waitley keep asking this council why they chose Lenham Heath for their council-led garden community location. The Save Our Heathlands Action Group cannot get to the bottom of this question. In the interests of democracy and transparency, we ask you again, why Lenham Heath?
Thank you very much. The Council has given serious consideration to the Council-led garden community proposition for clear reasons, and there is cross-party support for it. One of the Council's 4 priorities is to embrace growth and enable infrastructure. The Council wants to ensure that we lead and shape our place as it grows, including leading the master planning and investing to bring about high-quality housing and jobs in the borough. The Council has made commitment through adoption of the new strategic plan in December 2018 to take a proactive role in creating potentially investing in new places. This approach will enable the Council to demonstrate and attempt to discharge its statutory obligations to meet its housing requirement as defined by the government's standardised methodology. One effective way to achieve this is through the creation of a garden community where the uplift in land value that occurs through development can be captured and invested for infrastructure. The Council therefore commissioned advice to assist in its consideration of suitable locations for garden communities. The process undertaken was to consider the whole borough to evaluate the suitability of potential locations. Heathlands is the preferred location for the Council-led proposition because the location affords good infrastructure possibilities and it's relatively unconstrained in planning terms and has relatively few but large land ownerships. It was also understood that it was not likely to be a market-led proposal for this location at the time that we assessed, that the assessment was commissioned. To be clear, this wasn't the only potential suitable location for a garden community, but the one most appropriate for the Council-led proposal at that time. There are now market-led proposals submitted through the local plan review call for sites process for garden communities in other parts of the borough. And therefore, the local planning authority will consider all of them, including land east of Lenham. The council, in its role as the local planning authority, will produce preferred alternative spatial development strategies for the borough later in the year, and these will be subject of public consultation before any decisions are made by the local planning authority, on which, if any of the locations to take forward in this local plan review. Would any other leaders present wish to comment? Do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Keeping in the spirit of transparency, can you please share your work to date on the testing of reasonable alternatives to this site?
I think I've just said that there were other presentations made by other development companies or bodies or landowners that put forward other sites. And if we were to make ours open to you, then the other people will be saying, well, why can't we see them? So at this point, I'm afraid I'm not able to do that. Thank you very much. Our final question is from Mr. Richard Proctor.
Thank you. The draft capital finance strategy for 2020-21 and beyond still shows a budget of 3.3 million for the council-led garden community at Lenham. Following the strong opposition that you felt at the Save Our Heathlands residents meeting on the 24th of January, and upon learning that 96% of respondents to Helen Whately MP's recent survey oppose this proposal, do you believe this council has the mandate of its taxpayers to continue to spend such considerable sums of money on this project?
Thank you very much for the question. This council has responsibility for planning where future development will occur in the borough, including how the homes, jobs and infrastructure needed for the future will be delivered. This is a difficult task and one that we take very seriously. We've considered our strategy carefully, and this has resulted in cross-party support for garden communities to be a key part of delivering high-quality housing and jobs in the decades ahead. This is reflected in our strategic plan and in the decision of the Strategic Plan and Infrastructure Committee to issue the prospectus for garden communities as a part of the call for sites being undertaken as part of the local plan review, and the authority's decision via the Policy and Resources Committee to pursue its own council-led community proposition. The officer report on this project to this committee in September 2019 indicated that the spend on the project would be around £150,000 by the end of the financial year. And this committee will evaluate the progress to date. At this point, we will have, if any, further spending to authorise over whatever period. The figure of 3.3 million in the Council's capital programme is an estimate of costs to promote the proposal successfully through the local plan process and onto allocation, to secure a planning consent and to secure an interest in the land, all of which could take around 5 years. This project meets the Council's criteria for capital investment, in that it supports the Council's strategic plan priorities of embracing growth and enabling infrastructure and creating new homes and communities. This capital programme item remains subject to approval by the Council at its meeting on the 26th of February. However, it was agreed by Policy and Resources Committee at this meeting on January the 22nd. The continued inclusion of this provision will be dependent on the Planning Authority's decision concerning the preferred spatial development options and the consultation that will follow on these. Thank you. Would any other leader here present wish to add to that? Don't all rush. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, I do. In your medium-term financial strategy report, it comments that there is considerable risk attached to the budget, assuming that applies to garden communities. What is your own assessment of the risk?
Sorry, did you say that? I couldn't hear this. Something started
Sorry.
here as you said. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, sure. In your medium-term financial strategy, your comment is that there's considerable risk attached to the budget. Assuming that that applies to garden communities, what's your assessment of the risk?
I think you're taking one item from one part of the medium-term financial strategy and one from another. The overall risk to any budget could be seen from external sources, not necessarily ones that we're looking at and you're asking questions about. The only risk that I would see to this is that it doesn't come out the other end of the call for sites and it doesn't proceed. Therefore, the money we would have spent to that point would be at risk. But because of the items and the way I've explained it prior, we have to pursue these things because we can't, as a council, just let this happen. We can't let developers come from all different directions. We have to try and plan for the future. I said this is decades, and I'm not wrong with this. This is decades into the future we've got to try and look forward to. So, no, I don't think so. I think there's a look at two ends of our medium-term financial strategy. But thank you very much for your questions. Okay, so now sorry to make you get up twice from the seat, but a question from members to me. Thank you. Councillor Sams.
Thank you. Can you please tell us the financial cost of inviting Lord Taylor to speak on garden communities to members at the briefing meeting last week?
This is really quite simple. I don't really know why I'm looking for the piece of paper. I was trying to follow your question. There was no cost at all. Lord Taylor came down and it's something that he enjoys coming and speaking to councils. So other than councillors coming here and listening and having one of the stewards here to open up the town hall, I'm afraid there were no costs at all. Thank you very much. Would any other leaders like to comment? And do you have a supplementary?
Yes.
Oh. Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Yes. Even if we had paid him a modest amount, I think it would have been worthwhile. Certainly I learned a lot about garden communities, and it did raise in my mind some question marks about all the garden communities being proposed, and in particular reference to Heathlands, or whatever we're going to call it. So I think it was a very informative talk, and I learnt a lot more, that evening.
Thank you very much. Apparently I shouldn't ask if you want a supplementary question, but I've asked, so I've started, so I'll finish. Do you have anything else?
Yes, and thank you for the answer on that. The other question was that obviously, as we've listened to Lord Taylor about the positives of the garden community, how about a balanced approach ensuring councillors receive a presentation from individuals offering an alternative to garden communities? I just wondered whether this has been considered, bearing in mind the significant financial and social risk to the council.
Do you mean that we should find somebody from a garden community that already exists and ask them to come and tell us their experience? That's the only way that I would think it's a balanced way. We can't start having people come in just because of where they live particularly and say whether they think it's a good or a bad idea. The process is set out, as we've said. We're in this call for sites. The process will yield what will come through the process. And at that time, we will then be able to listen to members of the public after the sites come through that process. So thank you very much for a secondary question. Thank you. Okay, item 12, the committee work programme. Mr Green.
I've nothing to add to the schedule that's in front of you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any points to raise about the work programme or anything that you want brought ahead, moved? No? Okay. Thank you. So, item 13 is a reference from Audit, Governance and Standards Committee about counter-fraud and corruption policy. I refer to Mr O'Connell.
Good evening, members and members of the public. The Audit, Governance Standards Committee met on the 13th of January 2020 and considered the counter-fraud and corruption policy. There was robust debate and a number of comments from members, including the independent members of the committee who are external to the council, and they put the recommendation forward, which you'll see on page 12, with one change to the wording to strengthen it. I don't intend to add much more to my introduction, as a number of members of this committee are also on the Audit Governance Standards Committee and can add to this introduction if they wish. So the recommendation is before you.
Thank you very much. I've had indication from Councillor Perry at the moment. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an excellent report, and I had to declare that I'm a member of the Audit Committee as well. I think the changes, the little tweaks on it are very good. It follows the SIPFA guidance, which I fully approve of, and I'd like to move that we approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's seconded by Councillor English. Do you wish to speak, Councillor English, as a seconder?
Very briefly, I'm not currently a member of the Audit and Standards Committee, but I have read the report and it is an excellent piece of work, and congratulations to all concerned officers and members.
Thank you very much. The only comment I would like to make about it, yes, I'm on the Audit Governance and Standards as well. We also have 2 external members that are on that committee, and quite a few of the alterations to the papers you see before you have come from those 2 external members who add a great deal of value and bring a different perspective as well, and they are valued part of that committee. So I would just like to register our thanks to them for what they do. So it's been proposed and seconded. Is anybody else wishing to speak? All those in favour? Unanimously, thank you. Item 14 then, Your Future, Our Priority, a consultation response. A report to be presented by Angela Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought it would be helpful if the leader of KCC, Councillor Roger Goff, introduced KCC's new draft strategic plan. So, by the wonders of modern technology, I look to Ryan. Yeah, hope the plug stays in.
At first sight, the strategic statement might sound a little bit dull, but what it's actually about is how we set the course for all the things the County Council does over the next few years, things that will make a real difference to the lives of people in Kent through all the services we provide, whether it is in social services, roads, schools, country parks, like this one that we're sitting in at the moment, all those different things that we help to provide for residents in Kent. We're trying to set out what our priorities are, what we think is really important over the next few years, and this is a chance to shape it. I've just become leader of the council in the last few weeks. This is a chance for us all to set the course, to focus on the things that are really important. And we've got to do that as well as we can. We need to know what it is that really matters to people in Kent. There are some great opportunities. There are also some quite tough choices to be made in terms of what we give the most priority to. We've often talked about services that provide the best start in life for young people. We've talked about protecting elderly and vulnerable residents as well, but also about those services that people come across in their day-to-day lives. So the people who may be in the middle of life, not necessarily dependent on some of our other services, but for whom the state of the roads, the amenity of where they live, these sorts of things really matter as well. And it's very important that we hear from all those different groups and get a view in the round as to what is it that actually is going to make life in Kent better.
Thank you. So the plan itself, and I didn't include the plan on the agenda because it's 44 pages, but it's available online, and I did include a link if you wanted to go and look at it. And the consultation actually runs until 17th of February, so if people want to respond individually, it's open at the moment. The plan itself really emphasises the importance of partnership working, which is really positive to see, and it also broadly aligns with our own vision and priorities. So our response is focused on where we believe there are gaps, where we think we need to challenge, or where we believe clarification is required for each of the 7 outcomes. For example, we would like the North Kent Enterprise Zone and the Kent Innovation Centre to be managed in outcome 1, because they're missing, and I think they should be in there. Under outcome 4, our response actually challenges KCC's ambition on becoming carbon neutral. We are requesting quicker action on climate change, and we'd like to see a commitment to 2030, which is in line with most of the district councils in Kent, so I think that's fair. And then just another couple on outcome 6 and 7. We've asked for a recognition of inclusive growth, the district's role in public health, and the wider social determinants of health. But overall, it's a very positive document and aligns broadly to our own vision, and our response reflects that. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Not a limb moved. Oh, there we are, sorry. Absolutely. In the order they came up then, Councillor Blackmore, Councillor English, and welcome Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs Woodhouse, may I ask you to turn to page 9 of the report, which is page 41 of our agenda, where it's got securing sustainable infrastructure. And at the top of the second paragraph, the latter part says, of the first sentence, significant infrastructure to support the growth plan for the county and Maidstone Borough in particular. Just to be really picky, I'd swing that round the other way and have Maidstone Borough first, because at the end of the day, this is our response. So I'd want us to be top of the tree, not hanging around the bottom. And I think where it says the acknowledgement of the vital importance of KCC working collaboratively, I think I'd probably be even stronger than that, because I think collaboration and constructive working hasn't always been at the top of everyone's agenda. So whether we say it is of utmost importance or the primary importance or the primary reason, so that we just strengthen it a little bit, if that's okay. Thank you.
I will say that from my contact with many KCC departments at the moment, and indeed the leader, cooperation is very much at the top of their list at the moment. So a very good, well received. Yes, we can, but yeah, I agree. Okay. Next then was, did you want to reply to any of that? Okay. Councillor English, please.
In general, I'm quite happy with our response. It gives the county a couple of nudges. The document was going in the right direction by and large, but it needed a couple of nudges, and I think we've made them appropriately. It's just a question, really. I mean, it was raised, I think, by a county cabinet member about the lack of us as a council asking for waste infrastructure and recycling infrastructure which is often provided by the county within our SIL and Section 106. Sorry? Yeah, does it, in terms of joined up thinking when we're talking about infrastructure, help the county and ourselves to actually reference that type of infrastructure when we're talking about that? Because otherwise people think it's basically highways and schools. It's just something that we might want to reference, given that it's on the county's agenda and it's something we need to look at as well.
Okay, are you looking for reference, or would you want us to come back to that one?
We do talk about waste and recycling under one of the later outcomes, but if members wish that to be included under infrastructure, I can certainly include it. I can put something on about having appropriate infrastructure for waste and recycling. We can add that to it, but it does feature later in the green outcome. So it's up to the committee, but I'm happy to put it in if that's what you wish.
I got indication from from Mr. Cornell about this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think you raised a good point there, Councillor English. It is an area of work that we are collaborating with KCC on in terms of their views as to the directions we should think about for the reprocurement of our waste contract. So those discussions are ongoing, and I'll work with Angela, if that's okay, to incorporate some wording around that. Exactly right, yeah. Those form part of the discussions.
Okay, and after a considerable break, but welcoming him back to the fold, Councillor Round.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start with outcome 3 and mention the fact that the word lorries doesn't appear once. I am severely concerned about the movement of lorries throughout villages. I'm severely concerned about the parking of lorries in various places where they deposit certain amounts of litter. I'd just like to see, possibly in the words where it says transport issues will require locally led and designed solutions, and we would like to see this to feature more strongly in your strategy. Transport issues have to cover more than just cars, cycling and walking. I just like the word lorries or something effectively about the movement of freight taken a bit more seriously in such wording. I'll move on to the next point if somebody wants to come back to me on that.
Councillor Round, are you referring for page 43?
Page 43, outcome 3.
Do you want to respond to that one first?
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry. So in KCC's document, they do talk about the impact of HGVs. So in there, so apologies because you haven't got this in front of you. So actually they talk about Kent's strategic road network means that there are high levels of freight and heavy goods vehicles travelling through the county. Whilst this is vital to support the economy and logistics industries, we accept the negative impact HGVs and lorry parking can have on Kent's local communities. We will prioritise collective lobbying with our partners to secure appropriate funding and a joined-up long-term solution to these issues. It then features in their objectives going forward. So we could put in that we support this, if that would be helpful. So I can put that in under outcome 3, that it is mentioned.
Carry on, Councillor Round.
Okay. They say partners. I trust that those partners include neighbouring counties, not just within the county itself, because lorry movement is very much based on a series of dominoes, not just in Kent on, say, the M2 and the M20. It's the whole of the M25, the lack of parking around the whole of the M25, right up the M1, M11, etc., etc. I'd like to see some positive attempts for that, because we get the brunt in the bit between London and Dover. The whole lorry problem is much bigger than just a Kent issue.
Yep, completely agree. And I don't want to mention Brexit, but obviously that was when we were looking at Operation Brock. It wasn't just us. You have to look far beyond. So yeah, I completely agree with where you're coming from, and they do actually talk about it. They said we will work with our regional partners, so they recognise it has to be cross-country with those that we work alongside. But again, I can emphasise that that's really important in our response, if that's okay. But they do talk about it.
Yeah, I totally agree there with all the process we went through with Brock and how far out they were casting the net. I'm sure they're very aware, and we will endorse that.
The next point is outcome 7, quality health, care and support. Whilst I don't have the KCC document in front of me, can you confirm that there is going to be some form of prioritising around the lack of abilities for certain people in rural areas to access certain facilities and how difficult it is? And secondly, the next point I'd like to emphasise is the word poor housing that's mentioned in the third line on on provide any comments below. Poor housing is constantly assumed to be basically bricks and mortar buildings. We have a considerable problem with a lack of gypsy and traveller provision in this county. It is throughout the county, and it is particularly affecting Maidstone Borough. I'd like to see more emphasis placed on that matter.
Okay, noted on that, yes? Right, well, that was your 3 questions. That's caught up with the ones you've missed. So I think you're up to speed with that. Thank you. Councillor Perry, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say it's very difficult doing these responses, and it's very easy for us to sit around here and go through. The first draft is always the most difficult. And Angela, you've done a really good job on this, I think. I really do, and your whole team. So I just wanted to say that up front. I agree with the points made, particularly by Councillor Blackmore and by Councillor English, and also by Councillor Round, particularly on the transport, because I live in a rural, and I live on a trunk road in a rural area, so it is an incredibly important issue, this. But I think you're taking all these points on board, and quite frankly, I'm happy to move this and support this on the basis that you've taken the points on board. Because it is an excellent piece of work, actually. You've done very, very well. Thank you.
I take that as you're proposing that, then, yes? Okay, fine. Move on then to Councillor Springett.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to what Councillor Round said about HGVs. I'd actually like somewhere in there us to say we would welcome more restrictions and enforcement of those restrictions on HGVs through the smaller village roads. So I, as someone that lives in Bearsted, and we suffer absolute hell every time something happens on the M20, I would like to see some much firmer action on the HGVs that are using the car sat-navs and ignoring all the signs. So that's the first one. And the second one, it's just a really silly point, really, on page 43, outcome 3. The third bullet point says effective promotion of alternative transport modes to provide realistic choice to the borough's resident. I'd like that changed to provision. Stop telling me to walk, stop telling me to cycle, provide me with a decent bus service. So rather than promotion, I think it should be provision. Thank you.
Certainly second you on that, absolutely. Do nudge him to your left. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the points I wanted to raise under Section 4 is the sort of how can I say, the maintenance of our roads and highways and infrastructure. KCC has actually taken almost a positive decision to work on safety critical maintenance. So there's a number of things which have become more and more decrepit over time. And I remember hearing a stat that we used to have so many millions in delayed maintenance, and in the last 5 years that's doubled. So there are things like lining, box junctions, lining schemes, which will not be done when they're raised unless it's a safety critical factor. And I think they do affect our communities. We do have problems on key junctions where box junctions are completely worn out, and a decision has been made that they won't be renewed unless they make a decision that this is safety critical. So in other areas we see footpaths and we see gutters or sides of roads breaking up under weeds. And it may well be that to maintain those weeds would actually cost less in the long run than the crumbling infrastructure. So I think we should comment on that. I think a decision has been made on that affects our communities.
Just to reassure you, they do talk about the importance of the road network, and they've actually got it as an objective for the next 1 to 2 years to visibly improve the condition of KCC-controlled highways, to demonstrate better quality of service and value for money, whilst developing a plan for long-term sustainability. And then they've got deliver a county-wide programme of non-urgent pothole repairs and carriageway patching. So we can say that we really support that, or we want more, or...
I think time and time again in the last 5 years we've seen a focus on potholes, and I don't think that's the full picture, because there's a very specific, we will do these, we won't do those, and I think actually on the ground you're getting residents coming back to say these are the things that are important, and they're just not happening.
Another view is available. All I will say is that from the vast numbers of people of the Kent County Council that do watch this, I'm sure we would all like to thank for the amount of complete re-road surfacing that we have seen in various areas. And I'm sure that we wouldn't want it to go unnoticed, that we do appreciate that. Absolutely with you with the number of updates that we get about the number of square metres of potholes that have been done. I agree. It must overall budget and balance out to do the proper work of maintenance before. But the roads are marvellous in the centre of town. Thank you very much, KCC. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Newton.
Thanks very much. I think one of the problems that you find with pothole working and repairing them, is that there are so many different contractors doing it, and there's no set standard specification for the repairs. So when you get bad weather again, around the edges, you're starting to get the erosion. And I think there's not enough concentration of technical effort gone into trying to develop a KCC-wide repair specification for these things.
Thank you very much. Okay, we had Councillor Clark coming in again. Here we go.
Just to extend very slightly, and it picks up this point, I think we should focus on audit as well, because we used to have it where, for instance, there would be an annual audit of gullies, for instance. Now it's only the main highways that are audited, and off of the main highways, the only gullies that are repaired, that are cleansed, are those that are reported. So if there's an area where there's a small amount of reporting, that will degrade compared to other areas. And things like highways, coming back and looking, there are two stages to pothole repairs. If you've got a major pothole, they have to make it safe initially. They've got 28 days to fix it. They can go there and they can fill it with almost like cold lay tarmac to make it safe, but they do need to come back. And that audit process doesn't always happen. So I think perhaps we can mention the audit as well.
Thank you very much. Noted. Councillor Perry has proposed. I'm willing to second this. So that being said, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 15 then, Policy and Resources, Q3 Budget and Performance Monitoring 2019 to 20. Report presented by Mark Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the regular quarterly monitoring report that we provide covering both budget and performance monitoring. I'll introduce the section on the budget, and Claire Harvey will introduce the section on performance. As far as budget monitoring is concerned, the overall position as at the end of Q3 can be seen on page 64, which presents the totals for each committee. And you can see from that that we're projecting an overspend for the SPY committee, but that's more than offset by underspends in policy and resources and CHI committees. And the issue in SPY committee is mainly to do with a shortfall in planning fee income. And it has been recognised in our forecasting for next year. We recognise that the income forecasts were unrealistic. So work's going on at the moment to reduce the income forecasts and to align expenditure with income for next year. So if you were concerned about what that overspend on SPY might mean for the future, please rest assured that it's being addressed. So overall, the projection at the moment, and it is only a projection, is that there would be an underspend for the year of 39,000. The report also covers capital spend, local tax collection, the status of reserves, treasury management, and Maidstone Property Holdings, and I'm happy to answer any questions on those. And the only other thing I'd want to draw your attention to is Appendix 3, where you're asked to write off a number of business rates debts. Now, we chase up debts vigorously, but unfortunately the nature of the retail sector in particular is such that businesses do go under, and in those cases, and that's what you see here, it's simply not possible to recover some of the debts. I would put the figures here in context, though. Overall, our business rates income is around 60 million a year, albeit that we as a council only keep 7% or so of that. But you're asked to approve the write-off of those debts, which I'm afraid are irrecoverable. And I'll now hand over to Claire Harvey to talk about the performance section of the report.
Thank you, Mr Green, and good evening, members. Appendix 2 sets out the key performance indicator outturns for Q3. There are 3 strategic scorecard KPIs for which outturns are available, and performance has been positive, with all 3 PIs achieving the quarterly target. And when compared to the previous quarter or year where performance is available, performance has either improved or has been sustained. Across the whole set of KPIs, 3 have been rated red as the quarterly target was not achieved. All of these relate to the objective of 5 in place and have also been reported to the Economic Development and Regeneration Committee. I will cover these briefly. You have, firstly, the number of visits to Visit Maidstone has missed a target by more than 10%. The tourism manager has seen a 20% drop in referrals from the Visit Kent site and believes that uncertainty about Brexit has impacted on tourism. And from conversations she's had with her colleagues in the sector, there does seem to be a similar decline nationally. Footfall on the High Street has not achieved its quarterly target. Last quarter it was rated amber. There has been a 10% decline in footfall compared to the same period last year, and at this stage it is not thought that the annual target will be achieved. The Economic Development team reports that high streets nationally have seen a decline in footfall, but that Maidstone has been less affected than other areas. The final indicator that has been rated red is contacts to the Visitor Information Centre. Taking seasonality into account, performance is lower than expected for this time of year, and it is expected that the annual target will not be achieved. The same influences apply to this indicator as for contacts of Visit Maidstone. That summarises the PIs for Q3. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, anybody wishing to indicate to question? Okay, in which case, I'd like to propose an additional point to page 52, a recommendation that's coming up on the screen. I'm sorry I didn't print it off. I left the meeting before I'd polished and done it. We're just making it larger, for those of you in the cheap seats. And that is, I hope everybody can see it, that the committee notes the current projected underspend for 2019-20 at paragraph A 1.3 of 39k and agrees that any unused members' community grant, I've just got Steve Mumford trying to ring me, an unused community grant for 2019-20 and the first call on any other unused resources from 2019-20 be used to create a further one-off provision for members' grants of up to £750 for each councillor for use in 2020 to 21. Anybody wishing to speak to the whole of this now? Councillor English?
Well, I assume for the purposes of debate you were formally proposing that, were you, Mr Chairman?
Yes, I am.
In that case, I'll formally second it, if it hasn't been already.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody wishing to speak to this? If not, including that addition, Councillor Burton.
Chairman, I have at a previous meeting of this committee expressed my discomfort with members' communities grants. So I would kindly ask that we take the noting of the first 3 items and take this separately, which I'm assuming you're intending to do anyway.
So it's the first 4 items or 3? Which one do you want?
Sorry, Chairman, I can't count. I did mean 4.
I realised because your shoes were still on. Anyway, that's fine. Okay, right, so you wish me to keep that as the last item to be voted on then, Councillor Blackmore?
Chairman, I have no reason to be difficult, but wouldn't we be better positioned to take that money and use it in places where we have an actual overspend, where there is an issue with the budget? I don't really see the benefit of this.
Okay, so...
no one's actually given us anything concrete to work with.
As it appears now, there will be no members' grant in the following year, in the next year, 20 to 21. This will allow a provision of up to £750 for each member to use if, at the end of Q4, there is the expected underspend that we are being shown. That's why I've not gone for £1,000, because the way ahead would see us needing to make various cuts, perhaps, potentially. But this, in my eyes, is a way of trying to enable us to do the good where we can in our own wards, with the money that we can find from this. And in the same light as the previous years, it was from, if you like, unexpected money. It's not part of the formal budget, but it is a one-off spend for the next financial year for our members to use. So it's not putting it into the budget in perpetuity. It is once again just a one-off amount and less than we have had before. Councillor Springett.
Thank you. The only point I'd like to make is that it's quite restrictive what we can use this money for. And there are a couple of bits in my ward that I would like to have used it for. Oh, no, it doesn't count. No, you can't use it for that. So I would like to see it being a little bit less restrictive or done away with, because I have found that frustrating in the past. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor English and then Councillor Mackay. I think if we want to review the process, we can do that. I don't necessarily want to unpick it all now, but if this comes to us every quarter, we look at how it's being spent, the process, and I think that's the point. Maybe in the first session of P&R in the new civic year, that we could say, can we please have this come back as soon as possible with a review of the process? So that would be fine, we can look at that, but unless we put it in at this stage, I don't want to do this on the fly, as it were, at full council, because I think this is an easier forum to talk about it, as you have now. Councillor English.
I would agree with Councillor Springett. I think when I think it was Paul Harper first suggested it, I could be wrong, but I think it was, I was a little sceptical, but it has been very useful. But there have been occasions when things that are desperately needed for my community have fallen foul of the rules. And to be honest, I have struggled with understanding why certain restrictions are there. So I think if we are going to do this, and I think we probably should be looking to get the maximum possible benefit out of it, rather than, artificially say to certain groups, you can't do this. So Councillor Springett has identified an issue, and I think we do need to ensure that without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use a cliche, that we are actually getting the maximum benefit from this, which has been very useful in my community so far. And I do think it's something we should carry forward if the financial outturn, as the motion indicates, it allows us to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, Councillor English is correct. It was Councillor Harper that introduced this, I think in year 16-17, as a one-off. Last year, it was extended for 1 year, and this proposal will extend it for a further year, but at a reduced amount. I think, you know, I've never had any issues spending my $1,000. I've only had 1 year to spend it in. But I'm all for looking at the rules again. So I fully support this proposal. It's a pity it can't be £1,000 as far as I'm concerned, because I think it is a way for us as members to bring a small amount of money to small groups, and it makes one hell of a difference. It really does touch people, you know? But, so, I'm sorry, someone beat me to the punch and seconded this, but I third it, whatever you can do.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Clark and then Councillor Perry indicating.
Very quickly, Chairman, I do support the idea that it can be onerous, and I do wonder, I've used a very similar scheme at county before, and I actually found that less challenging as a process to go through, because I found that officers you'd explain what you're trying to achieve, you'd explain this community group is supporting me, and the officer would basically align that with our values. So as feedback, I think perhaps the borough and the county could perhaps get together and have a feedback session about community grants. Just a thought.
Thank you. Councillor Perry, or is it Councillor Blackmore? I'm not sure who's got the question.
Yes, once again I find myself supporting Councillor Mackay's comments. No, I've ruined his night, I know, but I think I've always been in favour of this, and I've managed, and I know my colleague Louise Bryce, we both managed to put it to very good use in our ward, and I would love it to continue. So, but if it's at a reduced rate, so be it. But, and here's the but, I agree totally with Councillor Springett. I think having these rather artificial rules around it are slightly restrictive, I think. And I think if we can loosen those or review them, I think that's absolutely the right way to go. So I do support this. I think it's a very useful, I found it personally very, very useful, and I would like it to continue, actually, because I think it's a very good way of helping out our communities. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. So at the request of Councillor Burton, I will take 1 to 4 as one vote and then 5 separately. Okay, so it's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour of 1 to 4, please show. That's unanimous. And then lastly, item 5 as listed before you, as written out. All those in favour? Have you got that? Against? Abstaining? Thank you very much. That's passed. Thank you. Right, item 16 then, the medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals for 2020-21 on pages 94 to 231.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the final stage, you'll probably be pleased to hear, in the committee's consideration of the budget for next year. It's been a thorough and extensive process, and the proposals set out here, if you agree them, will go forward to Council on 26th of February so that we can set a budget for next year. And just to recap on the background, as you know, the Council is broadly self-sufficient. We've got control over about 90% of the income that we get. So there's a big responsibility on us to manage our resources effectively. This year, budget planning took place during a period of hiatus, really, because we are coming to the end of the Cameron government's 4-year funding settlement for local government, but nothing has been put in place to replace it so far. What happened was that the settlement for the current year has just been rolled forward for another year, uprated for inflation. And members agreed when setting the or when agreeing the medium-term financial strategy back in December that the council would do the same, that it would uprate council tax in line with inflation. So in other words, we will have a standstill budget in real terms, if that's what council agrees on the 26th. Now, there's a few very specific points to mention in the report. In the last report to this committee, we said that if all the proposed savings and growth were accepted, there would be a small surplus of 7,000. That's changed slightly, as set out in the report. The details of all the savings and growth have gone to the different service committees. The results of that are summarised here. The one substantive proposal to come out of that deliberation by the service committees was from SPY Committee, which proposed that the annual budget of 200,000 for the local plan review be set in stone in the budget on a permanent basis rather than coming to an end at the end of the current local plan review process. So that is reflected in these figures following the recommendation of SPY Committee, and you can see that on page 111, which sets out the specific proposals coming from SPY Committee. Now, that doesn't have any impact for next year's budget, but it will have an impact from 2023 onwards, because that 200,000 a year will be baked into the budget on a permanent basis from then onwards, if that's what you agree this evening. Now, I mentioned that the last report you had showed a small surplus. That surplus for next year has gone up somewhat to 87,000, as set out in the report that's in front of you on page 102. And the proposal here is that 87,000 surplus for 2021 is just carried forward to the following year to offset the deficit that we're projecting for the future year. Another minor update to the figures that were presented last time that I'd like to flag up is that last time we presented the figures for all the parish precepts. Unfortunately, the figure for Linton was misstated, and that's corrected here as described in paragraphs 217 to 218. There's no effect on the overall numbers, but it's just important that we put on record the correct precept for Linton Parish. Now, up until now, I've just been talking about the revenue budget proposals. You've also got capital budget proposals in here, which are summarised on page 135. And these are just as important in delivering the strategic priorities for the council. So, for example, they include a proposal about setting up a fund for biodiversity and climate change. And generally, the capital budget proposals help achieve the strategic priorities of making Maidstone a thriving place and improving infrastructure. And I just wanted to say finally a few words about the future, because although we're projecting a balanced budget for next year, albeit with a small surplus, in future years, the position is much more unclear because there will be a new local government funding settlement. And although we've got control over 90% or so of the resources that we have as income in the budget, the 10% which we can't control relates to business rates, where the government basically dictates how much of the business rates that we collect we can retain. Currently, we collect about 60 million of business rates, but we only retain 7% or so of that. Now, there's a risk, well, more than a risk, that 7% will drop in future years, and that's what's reflected in the projections here. And the reasons why it's at risk of falling is a number of things. First of all, we've benefited over the past few years from growth in business rates above the baseline that was set in 2013. Now, we know that that baseline will be reset, so that previous growth that we benefited from will be lost. We know there's also a fair funding review that government is carrying out, which will reallocate resources on the basis of need. And the need for local government is probably mainly in the areas of children's services and adult social care. So if those are the areas that benefit from the fair funding regime or fair funding review, then we risk losing out. So for all of those reasons, the position from 21-22 onwards is very uncertain, and that's why it's recommended that that 87,000 surplus, for what it's worth, is carried forward. And we will, as officers, start looking at ways that we can address that shortfall, obviously taking into account news that comes out from central government about how the settlement for future years will look. And I just wanted to mention finally a few inconsistencies that unfortunately have crept into the report on pages 100 and 102. On page 100, where there's a table which sets out the overall council tax figures, the figure for Maidstone Council there hasn't been updated to reflect the recommendation of a 2% increase. So the figure shown on page 100 is £260.46p. After the £5.13 increase that's recommended, that will be £265.59. There's no change to the overall Band D figure of £1,899.29p. It's just a mistake on the Maidstone figure. And a couple of other things. On page 102 at the top, the adjustment for inflation, it should read 24,000 as per the table on that page. And there's just a rounding error on the business rates growth adjustment, which it should read 58,000 rather than 59,000. Those changes are just for consistency in the report. They don't change the recommendations or the overall totals in there. So, to conclude then, you're recommended to agree the budget projections, the individual savings proposals, the detailed budget that's set out here, the capital programme, the Treasury Management Strategy and associated strategies, the £5.13 increase in Band D council tax, which amounts to 2%, the adjustment to Linton's council tax base, the medium-term financial strategy that's been updated to reflect the latest numbers, and to refer all of this on to council for their meeting on 26th of February. Happy to take any questions on the detail in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Councillor Blackmore indicating...
I'm sorry, Mr. Green, you completely lost me. I was looking on page 102 and your table's on 100. So can you just run through those again? So the figure here that we've got for Maidstone Borough Council, which says 260.46, that is correct or incorrect?
That should read 265.59. So the 260.46, you just need to add the 513 increase on to get to the correct figure.
The total is correct?
The total of 1899.29 is correct.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. At point 2.10, it references the expressed concerns of the SPY committee, which I think slightly actually underplays the seriousness with which I understand it was discussed at SPY committee. I think it was discussed in terms of a risk warning. My question is my question is one really to members around this table before we vote this through. Do we feel that that risk has been adequately addressed in the papers in front of us this evening?
Councillor English, in response to that?
Well, I was party to this discussion, and I think that, yes, the recommendation on the papers does reflect, and the budget change does reflect pretty fully what the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee said. So, yes, I think in that sense it is as accurate and as robust as it can be in the circumstances, but obviously there are always imponderables, but I think it's as good as it can be at the moment.
Anybody else indicating? Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, sorry if I'm flogging a dead horse on this one, but I'm just coming back to Councillor Burton's point, because my recollection was that the Spy Committee referred this back to P&R with quite a large health warning on it. And I would like to know whether that's been investigated and how it's been dealt with. Thank you.
I'm looking to Mr. Green to...
I'll start, and Mr. Cornell may want to add to this. I think there were 2 points made at Spy Committee. One was that the current budget for the local plan review expires at the end, or when the local plan is reviewed, which isn't really realistic because it's an ongoing process. When the current local plan review is finished, there will be another review, so really it makes sense to build the 200,000 a year into the budgets on a permanent basis. The other was about whether 200,000 a year is actually sufficient. Now, at this stage, clearly we've got money in hand, as Spy Committee was told. There will be 150,000 to be carried forward from this year. So next year's local plan review budget will be not just 200,000, but 200,000 plus the 150 carried forward from this year. So for next year, I think there seems to be general acceptance that we're well covered. And certainly it's something that officers are very focused on. They will seek to remain within budget. I'm sure if there are challenges, they will come back to members and ask for more money. But certainly for next year's budget, from an officer point of view, are confident that we can deliver the local plan review work that needs to be carried out. I don't know whether you want to...
Councillor Perry?
Yeah, I don't want to say too long. What really worries me, I think, is not so much next year, but actually, you highlighted this yourself. It's going further forward because it doesn't look good, and this local plan review is continuing as an ongoing basis, and it could be a big bucket of money that we're going to have to find just to survive. And that's what's really worrying me, looking forward. Now, I know 5-year financial forecast always difficult. I understand that, and I understand all the risks. But I just got a nervous feeling we're underplaying this just a little bit, because I think we need to be prepared if something's going to hit us, in a year's time. And that's what's really worrying me in this. Thank you.
Councillor Perry, can I just reiterate, as I'm obviously listening the same as you are, I think at the beginning of when Mr. Green responded, he said this will now be in the base budget. So going forward, it will be there. It's not that, like we've seen, it wasn't, and it's now going to be in there. As you point out, this is an ongoing, perpetual process that we have set, which is another reason why I'm sure we will continue to question it from central government. Councillor Mackay.
I mean, it seems extremely prudent to put this money aside and to assume that you're going to spend it. I hope that that our review, so we've got a review by 2022, yeah. So the next one comes in 27. Hopefully, we will not be faced with a further increase in housing number, And if our appeal to the government succeeds, we could be working in reverse. We have asked for the housing numbers to be reviewed, and if we were successful in that, I presume we're hoping for them to be, there'd be a reduction, not a further increase. So I presume that in 2027, if there was no significant or any increase at all, our costs would be significantly less in such a review.
Mr. Cornell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in respect of the line Councillor Perry was talking along there, the 200k is on top of you know, a quite significant staffing team that's always been in the base budget as well. So it's not 200k to do the local plan review. It's 200k on top of a well-established and well-resourced planning policy team that's always been in the base budget. I think that's fair to say. So it's additional resource to take on board the fact that the local plan review has to be done every 5 years.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Councillor Pearl. Sorry? Oh, no, okay. That's well, all right. Okay, anybody else wishing to indicate? Affirmative or positive or whatever way? No? Okay, therefore this report makes the following recommendations to the committee. I'm willing to propose. Councillor English has seconded. Are you happy that I take all 10 at once? All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Makes it nice and clear. Okay, item 17, debt recovery procedure and support for low-income households. I turn to our Chief Exec, Alison Broom. This is on pages 232 onwards to 285. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. First, may I apologise that some of the paragraphs in the report have the same numbers. And I hope that hasn't caused any confusion and that it won't cause any confusion during this evening's consideration of the report. I'm afraid I'm going to give you quite a lengthy introduction. There are 4 topics in this report. Firstly, it's proposed that the Council should formally adopt and publish a debt recovery procedure, setting out what the Council will do in circumstances where residents, other individuals or businesses do not pay what they owe the Council. And the proposed document is set out in Appendix 1. Why have we proposed bringing this forward? And the primary reason is to improve accessibility to the information. Questions have been asked by members of the public, including to the Policy and Resources Committee in the past, about procedures that the Council is following, particularly for recovery of unpaid council tax. In practice, the Council doesn't have much room for discretion concerning processes which are set out in legislation, but there is some discretion in recovery of the additional charges incurred as a result of carrying out debt recovery processes. And nevertheless, to assist the public in finding out about how the Council will recover money owed to it, it would help to have a clear document that is easy to find and follow. So the document at Appendix 1 is proposed for adoption and future publication. Secondly, given that we're talking about debt recovery, we've also included information in the report about debt owed to Maidstone Council. And that's summarised in paragraphs 2.5 to 2.8. And I'd just like to focus on a couple of lines there. Firstly, on business rates debt. And we've already touched on that in the earlier report this evening, including some write-off of business rate debt. I think it's fair to say that debt has remained relatively steady, despite the fact that the amount of business rates being collected has gone up. And indeed, there have been a number of government-funded discount schemes for small businesses, and Maidstone Council has adopted pretty much all of those in order to assist business in the costs of running their businesses. In contrast, the amount of council tax owed has been steadily increasing, and the information in the report covers the period from 2014 to 2019. And that's set out in paragraph 2.8. The total outstanding debt in January this year, the accumulation of all council tax debt stood at £5.5 million, and in 2019 the amount owing just from that year was over £1 million. And our share of that is 14.2%, with the majority of the rest owed to the County Council. I'd just like to expand a little on the data in the report, and in particular the changes that have occurred in the period comparing pre and post changes to the council tax benefit system. So we moved from council tax benefit to council tax support in 2013-14. So at the 31st of March 2013, we had 88 cases where the council was seeking to recover council tax debt from people who were entitled to council tax benefit. By the 31st of March 2014, that had risen to 276, and by last year to 964. So those are the facts about what we have experienced locally. The average amount owed has also increased. So there's been a significant change in the number of debtors and the amount of debt owed. So it's worth endeavouring to understand why that trend may have occurred. And that's why the report summarises a recent piece of work undertaken by the Institute for Fiscal Studies into the impact of changing the system from council tax benefit to council tax support. And I think it's fair to say we designed the council tax support arrangements for Maidstone, and so we're bringing this to your attention because, amongst other things, it's our policy decisions that have resulted in the facts that I've just presented to you. It has been brought to my attention that we might not want to rely on information from the IFS, but I would just like to say that the IFS is one of Britain's leading independent microeconomic research organisations. It is independent and it is widely relied upon by both the public and the private sector for its research work. So you can see in the report what the IFS has to say. Maidstone started its own council tax discount system with requiring households to pay a minimum of 8.5% of the council tax level, and that has subsequently risen over a number of increments to 20%. And I'm bringing that to your attention, as I've already said, because that's impacted by our own policy choices, and secondly, because due to a decision earlier of this committee, we are now doing a fundamental review of the CTS arrangements for Maidstone. And so what the report recommends to you is that we take into account, we consider what the IFS researchers told us, what our local experience is, and we take that into account as we consider design changes perhaps to our own policy going forward. So that's the second recommendation in the report. The third recommendation is that the Council should adopt the Citizens' Advice and Local Authority Protocol for Debt Recovery, and that's set out in an appendix as well at page 278 onwards. So whatever occurs, we will have council tax debt going forward. And I wanted to put in front of you the opportunity to look at how we conduct ourselves in the recovery of that money, particularly for households in financial difficulty. The first thing to say is that we clearly have a duty to collect the money that is owed to us. Council tax debt is the most common debt issue that the CAB sees. And certainly in my conversations with the Chief Exec from the CAB, it seems to be one of the most needless debts, but it's a debt where people present very late and things have often got very complicated and entrenched, and therefore difficult for people to be able to manage. So the aim of the protocol is to prevent people getting into debt in the first place, and should that occur, ensure good practice by the council in recovering arrears, only going down the enforcement route when other avenues are exhausted. So we've benchmarked ourselves against the protocol, and we believe that we meet most of the requirements, and by working together with the CAB, we can develop our teams to have working practices consistent with both the provisions and the values of the protocol. I have been asked, well, why would we want to do this? And I think the short answer is that early intervention and proactive contact with people struggling with their bill payments can prevent them incurring further charges, and the charge when a summons goes to the court is £110, and that can help alleviate stress. It reduces our collection costs and therefore the demand on our team. So just to emphasise, if we were to sign up to the protocol, what it would mean. It would mean reiterating the partnership working that we already do with advice agencies, including the CAB. Now, the protocol also refers to enforcement agencies, but we have our own debt collection team, so we've got more control over that than perhaps other organisations would have. It would mean that we need to constantly improve information supplied to council taxpayers about billing processes and how to get support and debt advice. And it would mean that we would put greater effort into engaging earlier with people who have not paid to avoid the debt escalating. Officers have discussed adopting the protocol in principle with the Chief Executive of the CAB, and it has been indicated to us that the board of the CAB would be supportive of adopting it, so we could do this together if you're minded to do so. We've also shared our draft procedure document with the Chief Executive of the CAB, and we have received and incorporated his feedback into the procedure that is in front of you this evening. Since writing the report, in fact only yesterday, I've been made aware that as part of suicide prevention work, KCC Public Health Service has suggested adoption of the protocol, which they believe could be a helpful step in reducing suicide risk. So it's proposed that we agree to adopt the protocol. At least 61 other authorities in the country have done so, and I'm aware of 2 others in Kent that have. Finally, in taking another step, I'd like to pick up the theme of prevention of people going into debt through earlier intervention. That is, potentially intervening before people are at the point where they are struggling to pay, so before they have started to accumulate debt. Why should we be considering this? If our strategic plan is to mean anything, and we adopted that in full council in 2018, where we made commitments, amongst other things, to a borough that works for everyone, tackling deprivation and reducing health inequalities, to my mind, we should be thinking about what we can do in terms of early intervention to prevent problems arising. Our community includes a significant number of people on income where debt, low income where debt is an issue. There is extensive data on this topic, and a small fraction of that is referred to in the report. The position with respect to low-income families in Maidstone, and in particular low-income households with children, is summarised in paragraph 2.27. This information has been drawn from HMRC. It's factual information, it's their analysis, but that only relates to income. It doesn't relate to the cost of living, which clearly is an important factor as well. So just to give you an indication, we have had concern, I think, over a considerable period of time about the affordability of rent for private rent in the borough. The local housing allowance is the maximum level of housing benefit that an applicant can receive. Not all applicants are entitled to the full amount, but it sort of sets an upper limit. In Maidstone, only 1% of shared accommodation and 7% of other private rented accommodation is within the local housing allowance rate. So that means that if your rent is above that, even if you're entitled to the entire level of housing benefit, then you have to be able to find the resources to make up the difference. The pressure for housing, we know, is high here, and the number of households on our housing register has risen steadily over the last 4 years, despite all our best efforts. It's risen from 601 in 2016 to 840 in January of this year. And 40% of people on the register are there because they live in overcrowded conditions or they have a welfare or hardship need. This is simply an indication of the lack of genuinely affordable housing and the consequent financial pressure arising from having a place to live for low-income households. So, what could we do? So, on researching the topic to see what experience has been elsewhere, recently the LGA, the Local Government Association, of which we are a member, along with practically all the local authorities in England, and which represents all councils, and so its documents have to reflect the views of all political persuasions. In their latest advice on what councils can do to support low-income families in financial difficulty, they draw on the work of 6 core councils, and in the report we've summarised the types of action that could be considered. Why would we want even to go down that path? I draw your attention to the second paragraph, 230. There are 2 230s, but they're both on page 242, but it is the second one, and I won't read the whole thing out. But that does identify the potential benefits to both the community and the council of early intervention and the other measures in the LGA advice. It recognises that there are many organisations, councils and the voluntary sector in particular, who have the power to make things positively different and at the same time reduce demand for council services. Now, I think it would be unwise to say that everything that has been learnt from the 6 core councils could be applicable here. So what we've proposed in the report is to put our toe into the water. Our resources are limited, as we've been hearing earlier on. So the recommendation put before you this evening is, in my opinion, quite a modest one, and it's recommended that we undertake a piece of evidence-led, targeted work funded through grant allocations to identify and support low-income families, including those in financial difficulty, where we can intervene to prevent problems, and that we carefully evaluate the effectiveness of this over the next year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Broom. I have, at the moment on my list, Councillor Blackmore, Councillor Springett and Councillor Mackay, and now Councillor Perry. In that order, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Broom, for your report. For me, I think that there's many things that you touched on, and I think a lot of the issues that are raised, there's no doubt we have to take note. But where I think we need to draw a distinction is not between those that can't pay or who are unable to pay, but those who won't pay, and they make a conscious decision not to. So I'm not belittling what you said, but I think there will always be that tranche of people who say, I don't want to pay my council tax because I don't like it, just as they don't want to pay their speeding fine, their parking fine, whatever it will be. So I feel that section we should pursue more vigorously if we can, if there is an avenue for us to do so. But with the remainder, with those that truly cannot pay, I think whatever we do, it has to be humane. And I think early intervention makes an awful lot of sense, because I think the worry that a lot of families feel when debt is rising can have a huge impact. So I think the early intervention work, I think, actually is an excellent idea. And if this is something which A, other councils have done, and B, bringing in this protocol, that's something other councils have done, I think that should be commended. So I would like to propose that we accept the recommendations.
So I heard that proposed by Councillor Blackmore. It was indicated and seconded by Councillor English. Therefore, Councillor English moves up the pecking order. Would you like to speak at this point or withhold your right?
Just briefly, I think the introduction by the Chief Executive was comprehensive and very compelling in its argument, actually. The Council has an obligation, I feel, to make its procedures. I mean, we've had a lot of discussion, haven't we, recently about the Council being transparent and open. Well, in issues like this, above all, we should be as open, transparent and accountable as possible. Within the parameters that we need to operate, and I do take Councillor Blackmore's first point, we do have to be humane and reach the highest standards of humanity in terms of how we deal with the very many people who are just unable to deal with these issues or have got into a mess through no fault of their own or through illness or bad luck or whatever. And signing up to the CAB's protocols is a good way of ensuring that we meet our own aspirations. I would say that, and the other work, we may see, there is a lot of work to be done, so we don't know what the final outcome is, but it behoves us to act responsibly, especially where some of the actions are in part due to our own previous policy decisions, to make sure that we are acting responsibly and with the best and most compassionate approach to those people who need our help. That's what we're here for, really, isn't it? To help the people of this borough. And this paper makes a small start in a modest way, as the Chief Executive has said, to try and address some of these issues. And I really do think that, well, there's a long way to go, but it's a good start.
Thank you very much, Councillor English. Well said. Councillor Springett, please.
I'm probably not going to be very popular. We are not a debt advice service, and I'm really, really unhappy about recommendation 4. I get what you're trying to achieve, and it's very worthy. However, people are going to come to you when you intervene with this protocol, and then they're going to get out all their credit card debts and all their other debts and see, can you help me with those? And we're not a debt recovery service. And I just think we would do better to support the CAB in their work, who are recognised and experienced in this matter, rather than try and be yet another level in that process, because we're still going to have to bounce them over to the CAB, because we can only help on the council tax side. We can't help on anything else. Plus, we could end up in a situation where we've given some advice and suggested things, but then we're subsequently bringing in the debt recovery people to recover the debt from them, and they're going to say, hang on, you told me to do that, and now you've sent the debt agency in. So I think we could put ourselves in a slightly difficult position by getting into something we're not approved to be in. I'm not saying it's not worthy. I'm just saying I think we need to be a bit cautious, because if we then send in debt recovery for whatever reason, if we've been involved in advising them, we're conflicting. And thirdly, there's a lot of families struggling to pay their bills and their council tax, but they pay them. And now they're paying those for the services we provide, for emptying their bins, for their keeping their streets clean. But now we're using their money to help others when they're almost in the same situation, and it doesn't seem quite right. So I'm happy with most of the report. I'm just not happy with number 4. I think we need to think very carefully before we start getting into debt advice, which isn't our fault. We're a council here to provide services. People should pay for the services we provide. And I just think we're moving into tricky territory.
Thank you. If I might just respond to what Councillor Blackmore said and then to what Councillor Springett said, because I think most of what Councillor English said it doesn't need any reply, really. I think the point about won't pay, can't pay, I think I made a point quite early on that if we're owed money, then we're duty bound to try to recover that money. But we do have choices about how we go about doing that. And vulnerability is quite an important consideration in doing so. And I think we're quite adept at being able to distinguish between can't and won't, and what the arrangements can be for making things more straightforward for people who can't. The early intervention would have an objective being able to put people in a position where they're better able to afford as opposed to subsidising. So I would like to move on to the issue of debt advice. This report does not propose that the council becomes debt advisors. This report does not propose that the council become debt advisors. We work extremely closely with the Citizens Advice Bureau, and we fund them to provide debt advice through grant, as do a number of other organisations. So there is no intention, no proposition, no proposal that the council should become debt advisors. If you look at the protocol and take the objectives and the arrangements from that, we are working in partnership with people who are expert debt advisors. The other thing I think that the CAB are very good at is having a comprehensive knowledge, not only of how to manage debt, but also the availability of many other types of support and giving advice on all of those things. Interestingly, the County Council also have resources for that. And in the report, I mention a connection with the work that is being done by the 0 to 25 Young People's Health and Wellbeing Board, specifically on mitigating the impact of poverty for children in low-income households. And one of the objectives, one of the priorities there is to maximise income for those families. Now, the County Council is looking to work with us to achieve that. I think that is a positive thing. We talked earlier about collaboration, given that we're in a two-tier area. But I think unless we're all working together, with each of us knowing where our strengths are and where our responsibilities are, we will not provide the seamless and joined-up approach that the public need. So the bit that is missing, to my mind at the moment, the most fundamental thing that is missing is having a comprehensive and detailed knowledge of being able to identify households so that we can do that earlier intervention. Now, that might seem a bit invasive, but I think we're seeing very positive outcomes at the moment from a similar piece of work that we've done to identify households at risk of becoming homeless, with the analytics that we've done with EY and Santura. And the whole point behind that is to identify and engage with people before they need to demand our services, to do that very, very early prevention. So sorry, this is getting a bit repetitive. I'm not suggesting, the report does not suggest that we become debt advisors at all. I think you're right. There are people who are struggling, but do pay their bills. And so if we were identifying a much wider cohort, perhaps, of families who are struggling, so low-income households in financial difficulty, as opposed to simply people who owe us money, then we could perhaps have a more proactive prevention strategy. And what the report suggests is we try it and see how effective we are, and if we're not, we can stop.
I just feel that once you start saying to people, well, how can we help you pay? They're going to say, well, I have to pay this and I have to pay this. So you end up being in a debt advisory, because you're going to have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk about those debts. I can't talk about that. You'll have to go to the CAB for that. I'm just, sorry, I know where you're trying to go. I just think there's a lot of people out there struggling, and we're ending up putting money into helping others when there's a whole load of people they'd rather have it in their services, I think. So I personally am not happy with number 4.
At the risk of perpetuating the same conversation, I think this isn't something that personally I deal with day in, day out, but I have spent enough time doing back to the floor with our staff, particularly in the housing team and in the contact centre, to know how they effectively join these things up with the right organisation, whether that's the CAB or anybody else. So I don't personally have any concerns about the operational arrangements that mean that we deal with what we are good at, and we work with our partners so that they do what they're good at.
If I can just say one thing, Councillor Springett, if you ever get an hour or half an hour to go round and listen in to either the contact centre or the debt collections, it is staggering what our staff deal with. I'm not saying I would change what the Chief Exec has said, but it is already the cross-section of stuff that they deal with and the way they deal with it. And the stress they're under, I get that, but it is a frontline service, it really is. I next have Councillor Perry. No, sorry, Councillor Mackay.
I will keep this brief, because if I say too much, I'll probably say something wrong. But why would we not want to support low-income households and to prevent them falling behind in payments? If we can identify potential households and point them in the direction of how they can avoid getting into debt. We don't want residents in debt on their council tax because we don't get paid. It does not serve us at all having 900 people owing us money. I won't get into the politics of why it is now 900. I promise you I won't. But why anyone would not wholeheartedly support this policy defeats me. Really does. As been explained, we can try something and see if it works. The reality is of the benefit system is it is complex, and more benefits go unclaimed. It runs into billions. The amount of single households that don't claim their 25% discount is phenomenal. And those people, quite often, or in some cases, fall into debt. It's ridiculous. So this is just common sense.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to be unpopular probably as well. So I'm just looking at the recommendations, which I think is probably the best place to start. Now, recommendation 1, which is about the debt recovery procedure document, I understand is within the Chief Executive's delegated powers anyway. So I'm not sure if that's the case, then I'm not going to comment on it at all. It's up to the Chief Exec. Item 2, I will not support. I think the Institute of Fiscal Studies report is highly charged, and I don't think it has any place in our recommendation. Point 3, yes, I totally support, and I think that's the way forward and is the most important recommendation in this report, because working with the CAB is incredibly important. I sat in at the CAB on quite a few occasions, and I know the valuable work they do, and I'm sure working collaboratively with them is a very important way of going forward. And we also are a funder of the CAB as well. So there's a whole raft of reasons why I think working closely with the CAB, yes, I support. Going to point 4, I'm with Councillor Springett on this, and I don't actually sure, I'm still really not sure what our role is in this, and we seem to be running along and running before we can walk in some instances. So I can't agree with point 4 because I think it's premature. I would like to see point 3 working, and obviously point 1 the Chief Exec will take on board, I am sure, and leave it at that. I do not support point 2, and I would certainly at this stage not support point 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Earlier this week I was asked in forming a community grant application, how does that fit against the values of the council? It was for planting trees. But it did make me look up our values, and I think it's probably worth reminding ourselves. Number 1, service. It is important to understand that everything we do impacts on our customers, both internal and external. We will listen to and understand their needs, then take action to provide the right service in a positive and professional manner. Go down a little bit. Integrity. Having the courage to act on our convictions to build trust and honesty within the organisation. Working with our partners and customers to create a feeling of openness and transparency in all that we do. And then equality. Valuing our differences and understanding how they can contribute to a better working environment and services that are fair and easy to access. I think the recommendation has our values written all over it. And I think that the points that Councillor Mackay raised were very valid. So I'll be supporting this recommendation.
Thank you. And lastly, anybody else indicating after Councillor Burton? Councillor Burton then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I come at this somewhere in the middle ground between the overwhelming enthusiasm and the healthy scepticism, if you like. I agree with the assertions of Councillor Springett and others that we are not a debt advice service as a council, but I don't actually think that this recommendation is suggesting that we become one. What it is suggesting is that a relatively modest sum of money is put into a piece of data analytics, which is something that we have supported in other areas, in homelessness prevention, and I personally think that actually, prevention is better than cure in almost every other sphere of public life. Absolutely. What I do think some of us around this table do need a little bit of reassurance of is the mechanics of what is going to happen with the outcomes from that piece of data analytics. Is it going to be a member of the Housing and Communities team that's going to proactively be picking up the phone to these people? because that has certain implications for how our role is perceived in the debt advice that follows, etc. So I think some more meat on the bones to that would help allay some of the fears on this side. But in its essence, I think it is very positive that we are doing this, or that we are proposing to do this. Partly, yes, because it is the ethical, the right, the warm and fuzzy thing to do, and also partly because, let's be brutally honest about this, we've got 940, I think you said, of these cases. If we can invest £18,000 to £20,000 and some officer time into bringing that number back down to a manageable level, that represents a value for money investment for this council as well. So I do think there are some huge positives on this, but I would like to see some more detail of the mechanics of how it would work operationally, and whether that comes back as a further report to this committee, and perhaps an early stage report of how we feel this is progressing as well, because it is a pilot, and I would also hate to think that we would be somewhere down the line in a year's time where we're just assuming that this is something that we continue as well.
Thank you. If we were to go down this path, then setting up the system to produce the analytics, assuming that we were to use the provider that we've already had a conversation with, because we needed to know that it was possible to do the analytics, would take, I think, something between 4 and 6 weeks to do. They are already familiar with some of our data, because we're needing to do analytics to inform any future changes in the council tax support system. The experience of other authorities who have used the same system is that, in very broad terms, it allows you to do perhaps 2 really key things. The first is to identify issues and information that may be of interest to a significant group of people. And that might be, for example, pensioners in receipt of particular support and benefits. But when we do the analysis, we see that there is poor take-up of that particular arrangement. And so in those circumstances, what other authorities have done is to promote the availability of that particular benefit or access to service to the whole demographic, rather than target it to particular individual households. And whether that would be something relevant to do, we'd have to wait until we'd done our data analytics to know whether that is the case. There is certainly the option of identifying and working with individual households. So the way in which the analytics is done by the company that we've been talking to is to use anonymised data, so no names or addresses. But there are reference numbers, so we can, if we choose to, work backwards to identify households. What we have found by doing a similar thing in housing for early intervention for prevention of homelessness is that doing those calls, contacting those households, we've been very careful and cautious in our approach. So we've said we'll look at no more than 5 per week, so that the caseload doesn't get overwhelming. Is that we've had some very positive responses from people saying that yes, it would be helpful to have signposting or other information from us to assist. Now, I can't say that we've had that on every occasion, or we've been able to contact every household that we've wanted to. But I've been encouraged by the initial feedback from the housing team on that. And if this was approved tonight, then I would look to combine that operational work with the work that the housing and communities team do, because they already have some experience and have recruited specifically for the skills to be able to have those quite, delicate and potentially difficult conversations. I think you're absolutely right. If we were to go down this path, it is important to evaluate, but obviously we need some experience to do that evaluation on. And so maybe at a 6-month point after the analytics we've got the outputs would be a suitable sort of time horizon to use.
Thank you for that response. It's very, very helpful to the understanding of how this process might unfold. I would like to propose an amendment then to point 4 to sort of in effect tie us into a reporting phase at 6 months, if that seems like the appropriate interval. Amendment 1. And Amendment 2 would be to suggest that actually during the 4 to 6 weeks set-up period, we will have another meeting of Policy and Resources. Perhaps at a future meeting of Policy and Resources during that set-up process, we could actually have some information brought to this committee as to the operational detail of how the data could be acted on. Perhaps, actually thinking about it, perhaps not within the setup process, but when that data first arrives, so that we could just have a look at whether we are going to do, block contact to promote a particular course of action to people, or whether we are going to be on the phones to individuals, because I do think that's the level at which there is concern from some sitting around the table. So a kind of 2 further stages of reporting.
So have we encompassed that either, Clerk? Have we got that as an amendment? Or because you haven't given us a specific amendment, so if you want to do that, does anybody wish to speak or comment prior to Councillor Burton coming back with a couple of lines as an amendment to point 4? Or even, do you want to make it just point 5 for clarity to keep it separate? I think it might be better to leave it as a separate item 5 then, please. Anybody else wish to? Or we can have just a couple of minutes. No pressure on you, Mr. Councillor Burton. So spring it, saving you there with a...
I just want to say, can we vote on the items individually, please, rather than as a block?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Do you know what? I think I can run with this now. So I suppose it would in effect be points 5 and 6, if you like. So I sort of propose 2 things. So point 5 would be that at the earliest stage of data availability, a report come back to Policy and Resources to brief members on the possible actions that may be derived from that data. Meaningful data ability. Yeah, that makes sense. And then secondly, that 6 months after commencements of actions on that, from that or coming from that data, a further report, progress report, would come to Policy and Resources for review.
Chief Exec may be able to simplify that, which will annoy Mr. O'Connell.
So what I heard you say was that to report on the analytical outputs and proposed actions, and then subsequently to present an evaluation report after 6 months of operation. Is that what you wanted?
I couldn't put it better
Councillor Blackmore in English, would you be willing to accept those, and rather than have an amendment, we just run through 1 to 6 and vote on those? Are you okay to do that and to include those 2 additions?
Happy to include the 2 additions. However, I'm also happy to support Councillor Springett's proposal, which is if we can vote on each individual item rather than having them 1 to 6 as a block, please, if that's okay.
I had taken that as read. Thank you very much, Councillor English. Councillor Round, you indicated.
I don't really want to make it any more complicated than it is, but I'm a big lover of benchmarking. And when we're coming up with lots of data, it's always useful to see how much better or how much worse we are compared to somebody, even if they don't produce the same sort of data, to find out whether we're particularly better. In this case, I would say, if we're any more different to our closest neighbours, say Swale and Tunbridge and Malling, wouldn't need to be any, wouldn't want massive data in that respect, but just some element of comparison.
So I read from that, as the Chief Exec said, there are at least 2 other districts within Kent that do this.
Could I just ask for clarification? What are you wishing that we were providing comparative information about?
Whatever you can benchmark on, because obviously people keep different forms of data.
Okay. Sorry to be just ask a little bit more on this. So do you mean benchmarking our current situation or benchmarking the impact of our actions?
Initially, the first.
Absolutely, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay then, if I go through them one at a time, they have been now proposed by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor English. Can I see a show of hands for recommendation 1, please? Those in favour? Did you count Councillor Round? Because I think you just... Yes. Those against? Abstaining? Recommendation 2. Those in favour? Against? Abstaining? That's carried as well. Recommendation 3. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Recommendation 4. Those in favour? Against? Abstaining? Recommendation, that's carried as well. Recommendation 5, those in favour? That's unanimous. Recommendation 6, those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody, for that. Some good debate. Item 18, then. Report presented by Ryan O'Connell, please.
Okay, so as part of the committee structure review, members will be aware that the responsibilities of the old employment committee was split out between democracy and general purposes in this committee. So this is the first time that we've had to form a performance panel as set out in the Constitution, which would have responsibility for carrying out the appraisals of the Chief Executive and the directors. The report doesn't make a direct recommendation, but it sets out the options, which are available under 3, which are the standard approach, which would be to have a politically balanced committee, which would consist of 2 Liberal Democrat, 2 Conservative, and then one other seat, which has an equal claim split between the independent and the Labour group. So a decision would need to be made over that. Other options then include having a committee, or subcommittee, sorry, that isn't politically balanced, or to go back to council and ask them to change the constitution in order to allow you to have a different arrangement. But I wouldn't recommend that last option, given the timescales need a different appraisal. So those are the options available to the committee. How would you like to take it forward?
Councillor English indicating.
Mr. Chairman, I won't belabour the point, but I think we get into difficulty when we start having bespoke arrangements. So I think really it is simpler to have a politically balanced committee.
Councillor Blackmore.
I'm not sure if Councillor English is actually proposing that. If he is, I will second it. However, can we not just do what we've done before? Because I thought it worked perfectly well. So therefore, why upset the apple cart?
Mr. O'Connell.
Because this is a new arrangement. So what we did before was to have a panel of 5 with each of the group leaders represented on it. That's how the Constitution set up the old employment committee. So we can't replicate that whilst also being politically balanced.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. O'Connell, and I think it has been something that's been raised in the past when you have particularly small groups and or pairings that have equal weight to groups that have considerably more members. So I think really it ought to be politically balanced. There is another issue, which is I am sure, bearing in mind there are so many people that work very closely together across the membership, the elected members across the council, I'm sure if there were issues that they wanted to raise that at either the chief exec's appraisal or the other directors, then it could be fed in via those individuals. So I can't really see the problem. So I think ideally I would actually go for the politically balanced option, and if Councillor English hasn't proposed it, I will do so.
I didn't, but I'm prepared to second it as you proposed it.
I've had Councillor Mackay indicate.
No, I don't think I do support it as it's, yeah, so.
Yeah.
A decision does need to be made as to which party the final seat goes to. It's absolutely fine to agree it's politically balanced, but it's just who gets that final seat between the Labour or the independent group.
I thought it had already been decided. Faye Gooch can do it.
And seeing as she's not here...
no, she volunteered.
It's a bit like the army, isn't it? If you don't turn up, you get the job. Okay. All right, that's fine. So we're going to be voting as on the papers, proposed by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor English. Those in favour, please. Those against? Those abstaining? Right, all that remains me to do is say I hope that was an induction of fire for you coming back, Councillor Round. Thank you very much, everybody. Safe journey home. See you next time. Thank you.